The title of the show was Cusp. And often when I'm looking for a title for a show, I consider the work that I'm going to show, and the actual title often is one word. And the word, in a sense, I contemplate or think about how would I like to intrigue my audience, how would I like to give a little bit of a pointer to the kind of content I'm going to have in the show. And I also want the title to ask questions. The title often points backwards and forwards. So relating to what has come before it, what is presently visible, and pointing possibly to some kind of what comes next. So the word cusp, also I like the sound of it. So, and the visual, when I write it out, I like to look at the actual calligraphic part of the title. So all of that is quite important. And in this particular show, I started by choosing a number of smaller pieces that were 20 by 16 inches. They were small verticals. And not unlike the show a year ago, they included a kind of a mixed media approach, meaning acrylics, acrylic mediums, painted Japanese washi papers, sometimes textile, and a number of acrylic mediums that are meant to show texture or reference different kinds of surfaces. So that series began early in 2017, and often in my production there are starts and stops. So I will do so many layers or so many layers, and then if I don't quite know what to do, I stop and I will start another series. So this is exactly what happened for the show Cusp. So the 20 by 16 paintings, I did a number of them, and then I went to a smaller canvas, which was kind of unusual for me, because my experience often has been with actually larger pieces. So for me to go from what I consider to be fairly small, 20 by 16, to something even slightly smaller was an interesting project. And so the second series, I approached the paintings in a similar way, but I was really pointed more in terms of the play of color and working with colors that appear to be black, but in fact are not black. So I never use black straight out of the tube. I rarely use color straight out of the tube unless I really consider it more like accent. So often what I will do is when I'm mixing a palette, and the first few layers of the paintings will be so-called, when I say pure, I mean pure, I mean straight out of the tube. Okay, so I'm not talking primers, I'm talking straight out of the tube colors. I generally do not use colors that have very much white in them. I prefer to mix, and so the second series began slightly differently with a very dark kind of ground, and from that dark ground the lighter colors appear, but all those lighter colors are actually in that dark ground. So already there's a kind of harmony that evolves. At the same time, I also showed some fairly large pieces. There was a diptych that each panel was 24 inches by 72 inches, and that was an older piece. That was a piece from about 2 years ago. And I felt that and a couple of the other larger pieces really, in a way, it's a way, as I say, to look backwards and to reference the newest pieces, 2017. And then the last two pieces in the show, which really came into being literally the week of my installation. So my process is that when I know I have a show, I generally pick out the bulk of what I think I'm going to show. Sometimes I even plot out, if it's a smaller gallery, where I think those pieces are going to go. And then I continue to work. So I work and I push through right to the opening, and then I continue working. And often what happens in this situation is that the pieces that are the most, in a sense, successful, so I'll explain what I mean by that for me, the most successful pieces come literally on the edge of, I mean, they're still almost drying as I put them on the wall. So that's indeed what happened with the show Cusp. So 2 new paintings came about, and the change from work from 2 years ago to the work of 2017 to these 2 newest pieces was that I stopped actually painting having a colored ground. So the pieces from 2 years ago up to the present, I don't like to use the word background, because for me it is not a background. More that I'm creating a sense of an environment or a space within which all of the other elements, the gestures, the pores, the suggestion of direction, form, color, etc. exists. So I don't like to use foreground, background in this sense. But for purposes of explaining, the colored grounds up to now have been washes, they've been sprayed, they've been barely there. So the 2 newest pieces, what happened was I went to raw canvas that was primed with a clear gesso. So it's not actually raw, but it looks like raw. So there's the absence of color. They're not white, but the absence of color. And that became the kind of ground of being for these newest paintings. And I did include the Japanese paper, less so. There was gesture, less so. And so the element of space and where exactly in the painting the gestures begin and end, all of these issues became more active elements in these paintings. So the 2 paintings I'm referring to measured 18 inches by 60 inches. And they were shown as a pair. And those pieces are pieces that I consider in the present, and then I've continued since then to continue that kind of exploration. At the same time, the small 20 by 16 canvases I've also continued, and they've in fact become more compact, more complex, less obvious color, but more mixed color. So they're very dark and they're very expressionistic with thick paint and bits of pure, what I call pure color straight from the tube. So I am actually pursuing both those avenues now. So from the 20 by 16 canvases that included certain gestures that for me, they kind of come and go in my artistic vocabulary. So sometimes they look like circles or half circles or scraped circles. Sometimes they make reference directly to a Japanese character, enso. So those characters, as I say, they come and go, and I kind of let them. I try not to impose them, because the work can start to look kind of stiff and artificial. By the same token, if they want to come back, sometimes what will happen is they come back, but they come back transformed. So from the end of my show into today, for instance, that relatively symmetrical round brushstroke, the enso shape, has now become more ovoid, and the actual width of the brushstroke is now variegated. So there's no intention to try and keep it kind of regular. So it has gone from something fairly steady and fairly pointed and directed as a circle, like that, into something that is now, as they say, much more ovoid. It's tilting. You see the beginning of it, you see the end of it, and it starts to implicate what is going beyond it. So those are the 2 directions now that have come from Cusp. And when I described in a very short artist statement the idea of cusp, so if you think of cusp even in tooth, like bicuspid, we're talking about the crown or the pinnacle. So this idea that there's some kind of trajectory or movement towards the top, towards a pinnacle. And there you are, something is happening, hopefully. And then maybe there's a descent. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. So again, the title for me really ties into, in a sense, where we are, okay, where we are, where we've come from, and then, of course, where are we going? So it's always like a moment in space. So that's how I describe it.